Do you believe that there's some being out there whose job it is to look out just for you? Could there be someone or something that's quietly nudging you along your path? Some sort of guidance that feels wise and warm and insightful. Maybe it comes to you in your dreams, or maybe they orchestrate those coincidences that feel just a little too coincidental. And they make you question things like fate versus destiny, or reincarnation versus this being pretty much it. Or could the idea of a spirit guide be some sort of privileged, westernized, spiritual construct that we essentially made up just to make ourselves feel more important? If you've been watching these videos, or if you're subscribed to the Spiritual Perspective newsletter, then I'm just going to assume that you're at least open to the idea that spirit guides exist, right? Obviously, there's no scientific proof, only people having these near-death experiences and occasionally talking about being met by someone who claims to be their guide or their, grandmother or their dog or something like that. And look, I'll keep it 100 with you. I consider myself to be a healthy skeptic when it comes to this kind of stuff. Just because I identify as spiritual doesn't mean that I just blindly believe every spiritual concept just because it's been referenced by some guru or some teacher. But I have to say that in this case, I am a believer in spirit guides. And what I'm not going to do is I'm not going to waste time trying to convince you that there is such a thing as spirit guides. But I do want to share some experiences that I've had in the past, and maybe they'll remind you of similar experiences that you've had that could be a clue as to whether or not spirit guides are indeed a thing. And if so, how you can connect with yours. So the first story I want to share takes place when I was a teenager, probably 13 or 14 years old. And as I've mentioned before, I grew up in landlocked Alabama, and I had never seen the ocean before I was a teenager. But I had watched the movie Jaws one too many times. So when I finally did step into the ocean for the very first time, I was on edge. And I imagined that Jaws was just floating out there waiting for me to enter the water, and that it would be able to smell my fear from miles away. So I was petrified. And as I was wading out into the water with a friend of mine, I made sure that my friend went first and that my feet continued to touch the sand. And so my friend kept wading out in front of me farther and farther. And then I realized I couldn't touch the bottom anymore. And I wasn't a strong swimmer either because I never took proper swimming lessons. I could tread, but I couldn't really swim. Then all of a sudden, the worst happens. My friend yells, "Shark!" And he takes off swimming towards the shore. Now, I don't know if he's being serious or not, but as you can imagine, I started panicking. My heart started racing. I started flailing around, trying desperately to imitate a swimmer, but I wasn't getting anywhere. In fact, I felt like I was drifting even further out. Then, out of nowhere, I hear this calm inner voice that just says 4 words: swim to the side, swim to the side. So I started moving to the side. And after a few moments, I noticed that my feet were touching the ocean floor. And I slowly made my way to shore, and I sat down next to my friend, and I didn't say a word. And to this day, I have no idea where that voice came from. But later, I looked up what that tide was that caused me to drift out further and further, and I realized that I was caught in a rip tide. I didn't know what a rip tide was, but apparently whenever you're in a rip tide, the way you get out of a rip tide is you swim to the side. Again, I had no idea what that voice was. It didn't sound like somebody was shouting at me from the shore. It sounded like it came from within. And so in hindsight, that was probably my first experience with the concept of an inner voice. With the next story, I was a little bit older, probably 15 now, and I was visiting my uncle in Charlotte, North Carolina. I would work in my uncle's office during the day, And then I would take the city bus from his office to the suburbs where we were living. And I kept seeing this really weird guy around the office complex. He looked like he was homeless, like he was mentally unstable, but he was a very strong, young 20s, very intense eyes, always kind of lingering nearby in alleys and just kind of walking around. And so one day, I'm walking to the bus stop, which I had done, dozens of times, and I see this weird guy walking behind me. I got spooked because where I was from, there weren't a lot of homeless people. And I started trying to walk away from him. And I noticed that he would turn every time I would turn a corner. And so I ended up ducking into this office building to get away from him. But the office building happened to be closed. And so I went through the first set of doors and I got stuck in that little foyer between the inner doors and the outer doors. And so I'm crouched in the corner, hoping that this guy doesn't see me. And then he walks by and he just kind of glances in and he sees me. Then he stops walking. He backs up. He opens the outer door and he walks inside. Now it's just me and him standing in this small vestibule. I had nowhere to go. And I had no idea what he was planning to do. And right in that moment, I heard another inner voice. And it said, pretend like you see somebody behind him and start waving and just walk past. So I said, hey, as if I saw somebody that I knew, and I walked right by him and he didn't move. He didn't turn around. And I walked out the door and I went around the corner and I started, running, and I caught the bus and I never saw this guy again. Now, again, what was that inner voice? I don't know. But it did have that same quality that I recognized from that time that I was in the ocean. It was calm, it was internal, and it was clear. Fast forward several years, I'm now living in Los Angeles. I'm now deep into meditation. I'm deep into yoga. And one night, I happened to go to this local spiritual bookstore, and I noticed that they had a session in their back room with the medium. So a medium is someone who can transmit messages from entities, right? That's what they advertise themselves as. And this medium happened to be a white woman. She looked like she was in her maybe late 30s. She looked like she was somebody's auntie, right? She didn't look like a medium. She looked like somebody you'd see at Bed Bath & Beyond. And she's sitting in the chair at the front of the room, and there's probably, I don't know, a dozen of us in the room. And she's going around and she's pointing at people one by one, and she's reading messages. And as she's reading a message from the other side, people are affirming that the person who the message is coming from is someone that they knew. And at one point, she starts communicating with this one guy in the room. He looked like he was like Asian or something. And she starts speaking fluent Mandarin to this guy. And, she wasn't a native Mandarin speaker. She was American. And she said that this was his twin soul coming through her. So twin soul means that in his particular incarnation, the soul has split up into two different people. And he had a twin soul that was living on the other side of the earth. And again, look, this could have been a ploy. Maybe he was a plant. Maybe this was rehearsed. I don't know. But I don't know why she would be trying to impress these 12 people in this room who paid, I don't know, $5 to come and sit in the room and listen to her talk about being a medium. And at that time, I had had so much experience with hearing that voice and, meditation and all those wonderful things that as a healthy skeptic, it still felt real to me. Anyway, then she gets to me and she says, there's a spirit coming through who says that you would remember him as Nicholas. And he wants you to know that he's okay and that he's watching over you. About a year prior to that, I was on a flight to Europe, and it was an overnight flight, and I happened to be woken up in the middle of the night, and I was just recalling a cousin of mine named Nicholas. And the next morning, I heard that Nicholas had died in a car accident that same night while I was on the flight. And there's no way she could have known that. So that made sense. And then she said, and by the way, you have two beings that are with you at all times, and they're just sort of floating on either side of your shoulders, and they're wearing these tall purple hats, and they're your guides. And she was describing them as if she was seeing them in broad daylight, right? And that was really the first time I'd ever heard someone actually describe what a guide would look like. And again, I can't verify any of it, but I do remember how it felt. And it felt warm, it felt inviting, and it felt familiar. It resonated, right? And so maybe those earlier experiences were random, maybe they weren't, I don't know. But while I'm not sure that everybody has a spirit guide who's floating on either side of their shoulders and wearing different color hats, what I am suggesting is that something was helping me in those very intense moments. And even now, I still wonder, was it a lifeguard yelling, swim to the side? I don't know. Maybe I imagined that voice in the vestibule. Maybe that medium set that whole thing up with the Mandarin. I don't know. But what I do know is this: the belief that something is guiding us, that we're not just randomly drifting through life, that kind of belief I find very empowering. I find that for me personally, it makes me more alert of every single moment, of every single coincidence. It makes me feel more intentional. It makes me more connected when I am able to tap into those internal nudges. And if you're wondering how to connect with your spirit guide, here's my suggestion for you. Don't worry about labeling it as a spirit guide, okay? Just start paying attention to an internal voice that does not seem frantic. It does not seem fearful, because I know those voices are in there too. You're looking for a voice that feels calm, that feels clear, and that feels direct. It's not telling you what not to do. Instead, it's inviting you what to do. Swim to the side, pretend like you see someone, and walk out the building. And what I found over the years is the more you follow those kinds of intentional, directional, internal voices, the louder they start to become. And not because it suddenly appeared and disappears, it's actually always there beneath all the fear and the frantic voices. But when you finally start listening to it and taking action on it, then you can start to turn the volume up click by click. And that's what I would call connecting with your spirit guide. I hope this gave you something to think about and something to practice. And I look forward to hearing about your experiences in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching. Just FYI, we post a new video almost every day, so make sure you comment and subscribe. And if you ever want to explore more, you can find playlists of all my podcasts, plot twists, and spiritual perspective videos linked in the description below. If you want to go even deeper, I've written several books on spirituality, happiness, and personal growth, and you can also book a one-on-one consultation directly with me. All of the details are in the description below. And if you enjoyed this video, I think you're really going to like this one as well.